John and Jason, in our conversations with our clients, we find that COVID-19's impact has been quite complex and in many ways not something that we anticipated. We find that the impact in things like credit-centric processes and fraud processes have been very, very significant. Is that something that you see as well, Jason?
Yeah, what we've heard from our clients is that they're wanting to do more analysis and the frequency of the analysis is greater. So the type of analysis that they're wanting to do is type of what if or sensitivity analysis or different types of stress testing. And they've got more of a reliance on their core data foundation so that they effectively have confidence that when they run these types of analyses that they can get the type of a consistent set of information out compared to their day-to-day runs. In addition to that, we're seeing that they want the lowest level of information that they can get. So we sort of call it sort of micro segmentation in terms of breaking the data down to a point where they can build it back up in new types of aggregations that they may not have thought about before COVID-19. John, what have you seen from your point?
Impact of COVID-19 from a compliance perspective across many dimensions, right? Just the pandemic, economics, sort of shifting decisions being made, right? And the prioritization aspects, the threat evolution, new forms of threats, types of fraud, types of, money laundering schemes, impacting financial institutions, right? So when you look at it from the context of a CAMLA or a chief risk officer can't prevent everything, but then, how do you react quickly, right? How do you leverage what you have today? How do you put statutory priorities first, right? How do you balance the sort of the experience economy, right? Balancing a rich digital experience with meeting, regulatory requirements, right? And the sanctions and the compliance landscape, continues to expand, not contract, right? And then just the operational challenges of a remote, workforce. How do you, continue to maintain the efficiency and the effectiveness of meeting your, regulatory needs? Those are some of the challenges that we're seeing across the landscape of our customers. Sid?
I agree with you. I think there has been a very deep fundamental examination of, as Jason said, on the credit processes, looking at the granularity of the data available, looking at the diverse set of data available and so on. Similarly, the same things have been on the fraud side as well. But also, if I wanted to also ask a little bit around, you mentioned the idea around the operational processes have been tested. And that's something that we've seen across the board: operational resilience, the ability for the infrastructure to really cope up with the volumes as well as the distributed workforce. Where do you think the new normal will land? Do you think we will go back to everything being the same, or we'll still see a highly distributed workforce? We'll still see highly distributed, processing. Where do you think the new normal will be, John?
I think the new normal is just beginning to emerge. Sid, I think all the different dimensions of change, I believe, will push compliance organizations to really be agile and nimble control functions, which is what they're supposed to be, right? If you look at the last many years, these functions have become labor-intensive compliance factories, right? So I think the changes that are going on will sort of push most organizations towards that, right? Now, the opportunity for all of these organizations is the right changes now can help organizations succeed in the future, right? And navigate future volatility, future influences, both external and internal, right? And we see organizations sort of shifting towards meaningful adoption of technology to transform their compliance functions, right? And create that resilience and agility that is needed. I also believe that innovation is going to be core. It's not going to be an intermittent process. I think the changes are going to sort of push innovation to be a continuous, process as well, right? And organizations will look at, technologies like ours to deliver visible value, right, as they continue to transform. So I think that's the new normal. It's going to be a continuous process.
And Jason, do you see something similar in the risk technologies area, in the finance technologies area, and so on?
Yeah, I do. I think what we've seen here in the last 12 months as such with regard to COVID has, for those who might have been laggards or doubters about moving to cloud and digitization and AI and ML, I think they're now believers. So I think you have more people within organizations and institutions that want to drive towards AI and ML and I suppose optimization of processes. And I think they can see the value out of it, right? Because for the last 12 months, they've had to actually rely on digital solutions to actually be able to do their jobs. So I'm really interested to see with the change in some of the regulatory regimes around credit processes, and I'll talk specifically about, well, I mentioned specifically EBA and some of the tightening of the processes that are going on in Europe. I'm interested to see now how we focus on innovation, how we focus on whether it's RPA or AI and ML as a default to be able to execute and run those processes going forward. So I actually think the last 12 months has brought more people together on a stable basis around needing digital technologies to drive more effective and more optimal ways of being able to run their business.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that one of the things that where there has been a threshold has been crossed, if you will, has been AI ML. I mean, we've heard a lot of talk about AI ML till recently, and so where do you think the threshold has been crossed most effectively? Where do you think is the main applicability, and where do you think you're seeing the highest impact, if you will, of AI ML technologies?
I suppose from our perspective, and we're a little bit more, I suppose, in the enterprise risk than the origination space as such. But I think it's the additional insights that you can drive out of the data sets you have. And people today are starting to realize that they don't just need to use models or functions that their own data scientists have created or their own quantitative analysts have created. They can access services and I suppose external routines to be able to generate insights. And I think that concept going forward of how do you actually not just have your own teams building different models and analytics, but how do you bring in outputs from models and analytics more broadly into your organization and sort of get value from those. I think that's really been the change that's occurred in the last 12 months, and I think Chartis is sort of behind this, is supportive of this as well, that we're going to see more and more of this going forward. I'm not going to call it crowdsourced analytics, but people are going to need to take into consideration all the different options from an analytical perspective into consideration as part of running their own business. So maybe I might go as far as using words like ecosystems and those sort of things. And I think Oracle has an absolutely fantastic opportunity to play a significant role in that going forward with our core technology base and our expertise in the financial industry.
No, I would tend to agree. I think there has been an explosion in the providers of data and analytics, and a lot of the AI ML is actually embedded inside the data or the results provided by all data providers and other people like that. And John, do you see something similar happening in the compliance space? From a compliance data perspective and compliance analytics perspectives as well.
Definitely, Sid. Advanced analytics, I would say, is massively shaping the art of the possible, and now beyond the art of the possible, what is realistically possible, right? As well, right? So we see sort of two areas, right, or two categories of areas. sort of the high exposure areas where you're looking at things like behavior detection. It's a high impact area, and how can you bring AI, ML, graph, NLP kind of technologies in that space, and then sort of low exposure areas, but again that impacts the compliance value chain significantly, which is driving more efficiencies, right? High degrees of smart automation, right? Process agility, etc. Right? So I think these are areas where we see a significant impact in terms of AI ML technologies, right? Monitoring blind spots, right? New transaction patterns, just the leveraging signals, external signals, right, outside of your organization from the public web, and then smart automation of these processes leveraging those external signals, right? And if you take technologies like graph, now it unlocks very complex structures which were previously difficult to visualize, right? And so mutation of risk across these networks, identifying behavioral similarities. I mean, there's a numerous amount of really effective use cases which are now becoming actually actionable and practical and delivering value.
Absolutely, the advanced technologies in compliance are, in some senses, part of the furniture, not necessarily something exotic that you're bringing in. Now, shifting notes a little bit, Jason, you mentioned all data, you mentioned models coming in from the outside, or new types of models, if you will. But the point is, credit risk systems have been there for a long, long time. Credit scoring systems have been around for a long time. In fact, one of the banks I spoke to said they've been around for centuries. I mean, he meant it metaphorically, obviously. But so how do you balance the old with the new? I mean, you're obviously not going to take out all your credit systems out. So there's a little bit of a balance. What's your perspective there?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? I mean, and if you think about it, if you go a bit further in terms of to credit scoring or credit approvals as such, there's a regulatory flavor to that as well. So there's approval of models in certain cases, and there's explainability of those models as well, right? So in terms of being able to implement AI and ML with the traditional analytics and models that we run, I think that is probably the trick. So we've seen that from our customers' point of view, that they've been able to use AI and ML in and around their regulatory approved credit models. So for example, let's say that you have a credit's been declined based on one of the models for a reason. And then the AI and ML would then be able to run to effectively determine, more deeper insights around why the credit has been rejected, and then what the paths could be with that customer if there was a thought that actually that customer might be an exception to the rule or something along those lines. In addition to that, the overhead in the credit process in most organizations is quite significant. So AI and ML to try and fast track that, so we can reuse information that we've got. We can make assessments on information, I suppose, more readily, moving up to the point of getting to the credit approval. I think there's some of the ways that we can that customers are starting to implement AI and ML to make their processes more efficient. And then the big one, which I think people are starting to look into, which we've had a few conversations to customers about, is this idea of almost running a shadow set of calculations based on AI and ML, and just sort of seeing, while you've got your regulatory calculations going, what does it look like if I hand this over to a full AI and ML type setup, and what are the differences? And there's a lot you can learn from that as well, even when you're running regulatory agreed and prescribed models for your credit process.
Well, that's interesting. So doing something around the process, explainability, replicability, and testing the models, all of that, that makes a lot of sense. Now, John, does that reflect, putting the same question to you, how do you balance these old versus new requirements on the sort of compliance side of the fence?
Yeah, no, I mean, on the compliance side of the fence, I think problems are, there's a lot of similarities there, right? In terms of leveraging your existing data pipelines, right? The use of data, right? So there's that core that is happening there. And then, when you look at newer capabilities coming in, right? And some of the applications that I talked about in terms of, AI, ML, graph, etc. How do you make sure that the right data is available for the right usage at the right time, right? That's an age-old problem there, right? So that is still the crux of the matter. And how do the underlying data architecture and now it's not just information or data that is relevant for an AML case, right? You're looking at data from external sources, in a variety of data sources feeding in to give a much richer characterization of risk. I mean, in the end, right, what are we all after? What are our customers after? It's a holistic understanding of risk, right? So you see that, most organizations have done, profile-based and transactional-based, risk assessments fairly well, right? Now, are you able to bring in the external risk signals? I would go a step further and say, if you are, accurately assessing credit risk, why wouldn't you bring that into the context of an AML, right? And changes in risk versus, activity. So the right data architecture, and this is one of, Oracle's, significant strengths, allows you to do that kind of stuff, to get that holistic understanding of risk. So that is one aspect of it. And then just the effectiveness and of applying technologies like AI, ML, graph, increases manifold when you're able to leverage data in that fashion, right? So that's sort of key to making some of these things happen.
Great. Now that actually brings me to the last question in my for today, i.e. is the cloud. So how do you see the cloud changing the software consumption pattern of your customers? I mean, just what are the big issues there? Jason?
Yeah, we're seeing different views around, from our customers' point of view, different views sort of around the world. And there's a big focus on SaaS out there as such, right? So, and SaaS for the consumer industry doesn't necessarily have exactly the same meaning for SaaS for financial institutions as such. So the first thing I'd say is that some organizations don't necessarily want SaaS. They might want something more like a managed service or a hybrid offering as such. Other organizations might want a pure SaaS solution where it's completely hands-off, and with a click of a few buttons, they get some kind of outcome as such. Although obviously with SaaS, they sort of get a little bit less control than they would with something where they hold the reins a little bit more as such. So that's the first point I want to make. The second side of things is that and we've talked about a few of these things today, by moving to cloud, from my point of view, that should allow you to be more nimble in being able to bring some of these external data sets, external insights in, being able to use sort of analytics or analytical capability that is best in class from a horizontal perspective, not just for FI as such. And we haven't even gone into the world or concept of data sharing between organizations or between a consortium of organizations as such, which John might be more in John's space than maybe the credit space as such. But I suppose I see cloud as a tool, and a very, very important tool for organizations to use going forward. And they need to use it in a way that fits their business. But there are so many options out there about how you can use that to improve and I suppose make your business more nimble, more innovative, more efficient. So from my perspective, that's a conversation, that's a journey that organizations are going through, and we will see different usage models of cloud across the globe, and within region. I think we're going to see different usage models of cloud for one financial institution versus another as such.
Basically, what I hear is that from what you just said is institutions can be more flexible because of the cloud, and they need to really examine the specific usage model, managed services, SaaS, different flavors of SaaS, et cetera, et cetera. John, on the compliance side, is the story similar, or are you seeing a different story in terms of the way software companies are financial institutions are consuming the cloud-driven software and so forth?
Very much so, Sid. I mean, we are, I think across the board, we are seeing more and more data moving to cloud, right? And soon, when data moves, applications follow, right? So, we are definitely seeing that, that pattern as well, right? Where the more compliance workloads moving to the cloud, right? I think the opportunity that presents both for financial institutions as well as vendors like us is now this data becomes more accessible, right, to applications themselves, various consumers of this data. Take a sandbox for data science, right? Take citizen modelers who may want to leverage that, right? And so on and so forth. So I think that shift, right, facilitated by applications that help exploit this data, accelerates that shift more and more, to the cloud realm, right? One of the other areas that we've sort of been able to capitalize on cloud economics in general is the large SMB segment, right? Which now becomes open for us to provide what would be very sophisticated capabilities into that marketplace, right? So our learnings of having worked with the large financial institutions, the Global 200, and the Tier 1, Tier 2 institutions now can be taken in a way that is consumable by the SMB market space as well, right? So we are definitely leveraging the cloud and the cloud economics. And just the ability to orchestrate something like that to take these offerings to the SMB market as well.
Great. So flexibility, granularity, and the ability to exploit external software, all interesting themes. And with that, we close this session. Thank you very much, John and Jason.
Thanks, Sid.